Hello. Let's move back. Thank you so much for coming today. One of my favorite quotes is called "There was a reception," and it was written by Aldous Huxley. And my favorite musician is Jim Morrison, and the name of his band is The Doors. And he took the name from that book. And it's this cross-pollination of ideas that is so important. And I think that's what this platform can do for us. So we go back into our Saturday nostros and walk alive and actually add to it with a whole different lives. So today's theme is Crossroads. I think it's very fitting for us to have Shawn Meyers here talking about it. Before we get to him, I just need to talk about our global sponsor,
Adobe. They provide an incredible platform for all of us to bring our ideas to life, push creative boundaries, and turn imagination into incredible work. And our local sponsor, C2. They're an amazing creative agency that makes unignorable work for their clients, and somehow, just somehow, still finds the time to support the creative community. So thank you so very much. And now back to Shawn Meyers. He's an urban designer who's now the master planning director at DLR Group. So what does that mean? He designs the way people move, connect, and live. So over to Shawn.
So, just a quick thing about DLR Group. We are a company of designers who care very passionately about the power that we can affect positive change in our communities, specifically through our design skills. And this presentation will be about design, but not in the traditional sense about aesthetics. We're going to be talking about spatial performance. Yeah, so first, Crossroads. Where do we go with that? Are we on some sort of threshold between what we know or what we don't know? What's some other reality we're not even aware of? Or we have a decision to make or a choice? And are we really concealing that decision or are we revealing it? It depends on your perspective, right? And it was a question of slum clearance, also squashing uprisings, but they bulldozed these giant boulevards through Paris that we still see today. And in some of those intersections, like here, are really like an object that represents the collective ambition of what the French people can achieve. Or, does anybody know why in New York City, Central Park was made? I mean, the planners and the architects, they laid out all of those roads. Does anybody know why they would decide, let's just not continue the grid here? It's because they wanted to give a place for the upper class to educate the lower class on how to behave in public. It's a societal ambitions, true story. Yeah, and it's an amazing place. But it's about all of these is about mix, societal mix. How do you engage with people that live in your cities and your communities? Or another scale, Barcelona. There's something strange happening with those blocks, right? Kind of funny shapes. Nowhere else in the world do you see shapes like these. That's because I'll talk about this example later. But Ildefonso Cerdá, who was the architect of the time, every single corner, every junction, every intersection, he believed was a place for social gathering. So it yields to the collective, which is why you get those kind of larger, if you ever walk through Example, these neighborhoods in Barcelona, the intersections are a little bit pulled apart because he wanted people to gather. So, that being said, what kind of a city do we want? Do we want to grow into? So if the premise is that the environments that we live in shape the lives that we lead, it's a lot of responsibility if you're an urban designer sometimes. But you can imagine, this is Jakarta. It's a sinking city. The population is using all of the groundwater, so the city sinks, I think, 5 or 6 centimeters every year, and it's coastal. You can imagine that the repeated flooding has an effect on how they live their lives in Jakarta. So much so, the government is deciding to build a new city outside of Jakarta where they'll solve all of their problems. But if history tells us anything, that's not really how it works. Or, an unfair example where I'm from, a boring city, Cleveland. Yeah, I come from a very static place, I would argue. And that's why I left and was drawn to some more dynamic places of the world that we designed for. Or, a happy city. No one's going to argue that Copenhagen, who is regularly at the top of the list of the happiest places in the world, is not a happy city. Do we think people there are happier? Perhaps. Would you be happier if you live in Copenhagen? Perhaps. But in any case, there is still things that we can learn from these cities. So, if that's the premise, can a city make you a better person? If you lived in Copenhagen, would you be happier or more thoughtful or kinder? Can a city help you develop yourself? This is one of my favorite pictures of all time of urbanism. This is actually a book called Uses of Disorder by Richard Sennett, and he's one of the leading urban sociologists. And he believes that actually friction, and when you confront the cultural other, it challenges your societal narrative, so you become a much thoughtful and tolerant individual. Could you imagine if this was in Dubai? Could you imagine that? I love the little kid's face, like looking at this. So yeah, in some parts of the world, this is considered like the coup de grace of what will help you become a better person. Let's contrast that almost completely with the city in South Korea, Songdo Smart City, where they prioritize a frictionless life. There's no traffic, there's no waste, there's no people. It's, I'm told, quite a boring place. But, to each their own, right? Or let's contrast that with Masdar, right? In Sustainable City. So when you prioritize the sustainability over the spatial qualities that will deliver successful urban neighborhoods, you can see that there's more complex things to consider than just frictionless or friction or sustainability, whatever it might be.
Great. So let's kick off that on urbanization. So urbanization is the process of managing the growth of a city. And we're going to be asking ourselves a couple of questions throughout this next bit. Where is that people house? Where is that highway going to? Am I right? Am I wrong? I died. What have I done? So, a little foreshadowing, back to Barcelona. Ildefonso 1862 was the very first person in history to think about the spatial qualities of urban growth. So you can see in the bottom right corner the existing medieval city of Barcelona. You can imagine if you lived in there, the type of life you would lead in terms of outdoor space or access to light. So he thought, how can we design buildings and the city collectively and the roads all together for perpetuity? And if you look at Barcelona now, it's still one of the most beloved, 115, 116 years later, one of the most beloved and cherished and vibrant cities in the world. So you have to wonder, how are we doing it, right?
And not just we, I'm not just talking about the Middle East. I'm talking about all cities that are undergoing rapid change, which is a lot. So I will focus a bit about the Middle East because this is where we call home. And I want to preface this by saying I think Dubai is paradise and I love it here, really. We can talk about that later. So what kind of cities are we getting? I'm going to flick through a couple of cities and you can tell me if you see anything odd developing compared to what we just saw in the previous slides. So we have Dubai. We have Doha. We have Riyadh. Anybody notice anything strange? Our cities are out of balance. Good, Gora, you're right. You're half right. Tall buildings. Our cities are comprised of towers and single-family homes, which is a problem because both of these typologies, which is a word I'll describe later, for now we'll talk about it as sort of buildings, are terrible at defining space, organizing space. And that's a problem because one of the prerequisites for delivering long-term urban growth is coherent neighborhood structures, which means coherence in your neighborhood. We can talk about that later as well. So, yeah. So let's go a little bit further. So we all know that the world is urbanizing. There's a stat that goes around saying by 2050, 70% of the people in the world will be living in cities. Well, the fact of the matter, that's not true. The world is suburbanizing. The single-family home in the gated community is the most popular form of housing being built worldwide. And I would argue it's the worst form of housing. It's the spatial equivalent of an echo chamber, and I would call it America's most dangerous export. So the physical consequence of single-family homes and gated communities is an array of houses and walls designed to separate people while utilizing tremendous resources. The houses, as seen in Jumeirah or in most single-family neighborhoods like this, are concerned with only themselves, and the street becomes a conduit only to move vehicles. So if we're going to have a chance at addressing some of the macro issues of our time in our cities, which would be climate change or housing affordability or access to opportunity, we have to start thinking and building differently about our cities. So how did we get here? Many people love DIFC. It makes me sad. It could be a lot better. But we have, I'll give you an urban designer's reading of this. We have incredible, huge towers capable of holding tremendous activity, activating the whole neighborhood. But instead, the towers have been conceived as introverted developments, which means each tower is concerned with only itself. There's no dialogue to its neighbor. And this is due to neighborhood uncertainty. So when every tower was built, they didn't know what was going to be around them because of bad planning. I don't want to name names of who planned it, but they're right over there, across from us. So bad planning, and you get a neighborhood that's underpinned by competition instead of collaboration. And I could look at this and I could say, I mean, this is some of the most valuable real estate in the world. Why do we have large blank walls at the wall of Astoria next to Sky Gardens, which Gaurav used to live? There's no conversation between those. And you look at some of the other cities we're talking about, you have to design for those sort of relationships, but here we don't. And again, the street becomes meaningless. So you have a neighborhood which is underpinned by competition instead of collaboration. And Dubai has the 4th most towers globally in the world. Just keep that in mind. So what's the problem? I'll tell you the problem. It's as much a question of how we're organized as an industry as it is about design. So what we've done is, in our quest for speed and efficiency, is segregate the disciplines of architecture and planning, which leaves each one unable to deal with the decentralized, ruptured, and chaotic context that we live in. And so this is what we have. We've got planners who are unable to convey the spatial responsibilities to future plot architects, bad planning. It's not the architect's fault. Or more problematic, we have architects who are trying to master plan as if the primary objective of master planning is to create a beautiful plan, which is not the case. It's about convincing a diverse group of people to work together to achieve a shared vision. But this isn't just happening in the Middle East, this is happening in most rapidly developing parts of the world. But we feel it acutely here because we are a young city with few mature neighborhoods. Everything is kind of new, right? Furthermore, we're getting a form of novelty urbanism. You can live on an island. You can live on a canal. You can live on an island with a canal. Wow. New development has lost its relationship between housing and the city. I would also throw ultra-luxury development into this, which, small segue, I don't believe is very luxurious usually, because in the market, ultra-luxury seems to be about craftsmanship and materiality as opposed to the spatial qualities of what gives you a luxury life. But that's another design challenge that me and my teams design for sometimes. So how do we get here? New York City has the third most towers in the world. We're fourth. This is a city capable of linking density with economic growth, which is pretty much the objective of every city, while delivering productive and livable streets. Amazing. So what should we do? Should we add more towers to Dubai? Do you think that's going to help? I'm going to argue no. What we need to be doing to deliver successful urban neighborhoods is to be designing collective housing typologies, collective housing, at the same scale as our urban morphology, designing those relationships together. So we can look at Barcelona here. And what I'm talking about is designing for all of those beautiful relationships that we love about cities. You might call them beautiful streets, beautiful parks, great buildings. An urban designer would call that designing for the macro relationships that organize the urban fabric, which is the morphology, which is sort of neighborhood in the city structure. Ideas of hierarchy, balance, differentiation, complex components that require mutual support. So we can look at Barcelona here, and we can see that I can read by looking at this beautiful street. There's another likely parallel street nearby, which is dedicated to moving vehicles of a much different quality. I can also look at those, as I explained earlier, the corners, the interesting condition at the corner, and how they're sort of hexagonal or squares. And we understand that Ile-de-France wanted to make all the corners of all the buildings for the community who live there. Hyper-local placemaking, hyper-local placemaking. So my reading of this yields hierarchy through that main road. We've got the balance of the two neighborhoods, differentiation and parallel lines of the roads. And you can see how all of these things are held together in sort of balance, which is what creates a very vibrant, livable urban neighborhood. And this is our gap. This is what happens when intricate components are conceived in isolation. So typically what happens is we have planners who design really wide roads because they're planning to put a lot of people there, a lot of density, a lot of GFA, which means that underneath those roads there's a lot of infrastructure to hold a lot of people. But then the architects come through and they're designing their buildings in isolation. So there's not a, there's a spatial disconnect between the urban form and the building typology. Now, when this neighborhood is locked in comparatively limited value, nothing more than a commuter suburb, because what was I going to say? Come on, brain, it's early in the morning. Oh yeah, so lofty terms like, that you hear from people like me who are speaking to people, like regenerative urbanism or sustainable approaches or smart cities, all of that stuff is largely invalid when you have a neighborhood that's designed with this poor of spatial performance. So, how can we address this? I've got some ideas. This next bit, we're going to go a little bit deeper, okay? Typology and type. Type is the model of an organizational principle. Many people think typology means a building. It's technically not true. In design circles, you can get away with it. So the study of an organizational principle. How do we organize the space around us? How do we organize our neighborhoods? How do we organize our lives? Now, when you apply that to a building typology, it embodies the basic organizational performance, the history, the meaning of precedent types, previous types, and all developments of new design solutions. So, on this page are 6 building typologies. Building square houses are defined as perimeter blocks, slab blocks, and tower blocks. Everywhere you've ever been in your whole life is probably combined, made of one or more of these. All of your neighborhoods, all of your cities. In urban design speak, the city is performing as a development as element type. So I can tell you that a tower block like New York, the city with tower blocks will perform much differently than a city of
looking at one of them, you can't really understand much about it. When you put these in series and design proposal, you have a much better understanding of the quality of how we're designing for cities. Because implicit, the key part of designers, implicit in the typology that you're using is it's affecting how you organize the space around it. So let's go through these one by one. The villa. As I said earlier, it's an introverted type, which means it's only itself. It provides private space at the expense of collective space. So villa morphologies, villa neighborhoods are very good at what I've been arguing for. Design building type and morphology type.
But the problem is when you give up so much of the land to the private space over collective, you're locking in comparatively limited neighborhood value. There's no hierarchy or spatial definition here. Low densities, which means you're largely going to be driving and there's fewer urban amenities for families and stuff. So let's go up a scale. The courtyard house. And really, we're talking about how you think about organizing neighborhoods by looking through your design application of the building. So the courtyard house, a little bit better. It's introverted, but it has external ambitions in the sense that the courtyard of the home organizes the internal space where people live, but also the external space around it. It addresses the street because it has a facade on the street, has less land take than a villa, and has more collective space. But it does have problems with daylighting because you have fewer areas where you can actually see or
Into the home.
With hierarchy, balance, differentiation, many of the
concepts that I've been talking about. However, it still delivers, it's still a low density approach. But we can look at this neighborhood in Abu Dhabi, and it's actually really quite nice because you can see a sophisticated open space network in the sense that we have all of the courtyards. Yeah. So you have these collective courtyards for 4 towers. You've got sikas which cut through to others. And you have this neighborhood where you have roads working on one network and you have people walking on green spaces in another that are connected to courtyards. It's really quite nice. Let's go up the scale. To London, the terrace home or the row house. This is a compact type with external ambitions also, but here we have good spatial definition in the sense that you're beginning to see an urban sequence develop from the street to the frontage of the home, to the interior of the house, to the garden. And when you scale that up, you get quite a coherent neighborhood block. We've got enough density to create walkable streets and provide many urban amenities, and there's less land take, which allows more collective space for the neighborhood. But there's problems with daylighting, problems with the corner condition. What are we doing here? Where are we parking? Daylighting in the sense of you only get light from the front and the back, not from the sides or the top. So, same type, new grain. Here we can see a neighborhood that has stronger opinions about how do we resolve that corner condition? How do we deal with parking? How do we provide more collective space? Here, the designers are using the design of the type to mitigate what I would call the typological or the design weakness of the type. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying you have to be aware when you're designing of the effect on the space around the types that you're designing. If you're designing an urban neighborhood, obviously the other one is better. If you're designing something in this region where you're more, like right now, which I'm happy to see, there's a lot of designing open space that is completely car-free. So because we're not weird, but like collectively, there's more of a push to engender a lot of care into collective space and how we all sort of mix together, especially in Dubai. So this is better at designing more scales of parks and collective space. It all links together for sequences of spaces. Let's go up one. Stockholm. The perimeter block. This is my favorite block. An urban designer has a favorite block, like an architect has a favorite building, or a landscape architect has a favorite plant. It's beautiful. So the inside is very important because that's where the center of it is. So you have no spatial ambiguity. It's very clear. You've got streets, you've got places where people live, and you've got internal collective space of the courtyards. So there's a clear hierarchy in the block center. We push activity to the street. That's what it does. So it creates really active streets. It retains private space for all residents in the center of the building. It's created for passive cooling. It's safe by design, another thing. So how you design your buildings also has effect on eyes on the street, the inherent safety of your neighborhood, how you can deliver safety without building gates and fences is something that urban designers are usually passionate about. But I like this block because it is the original live-work typology. Sustainability is baked into it. You had people living above, and they would work in the courtyard, make their goods, and sell those on the street. It's amazing. The detriment is poor daylighting, and some people may say it's too urban. But we would call this a block with functional intelligence. So, if the interior of the block is important, what happens if you lose the interior and you trade it all for green space? You get the slab block, as we see here in Brasilia. So, you have strong edge conditions, great passive cooling, small land take, more green space. We're talking about design principles here. But the loosely defined spaces, you don't have your clear courtyards with eyes on them. It lacks hierarchy, so it lacks private collective space. And really that lack of spatial definition can be unsafe. It's very easy to have unsafe neighborhoods because there's so much space and there's so much freedom to walk around. There's no clear definition between streets and roads and edges and courtyards and things that that safety can be a concern. So I would argue there's an imbalance here, much like the imbalance of the villa, which was too much space for the collective or for the private. Here there's too much space for the collective, undefined space. So it's possible to have too much green space. Finally, the tower block, the darling of developers. So it delivers high density, it's highly productive and sustainable, and has small land take. However, terrible spatial definition. A facade, a tower block, you have to think about, like, you're going to window in how urban designers think right now. So a tower block is really just a collection of facades, 4 facades, that trades its relationship at the ground level to have limitless functions above. And the ground is then filled up with building servicing, logistics, access, lobbies, things that aren't really contributing to the neighborhood around it. Which means, if you're an architect, I'll say something contentious, the most important part of designing a tower block is how it reaches the ground. So you need to design for functional diversity, have a plinth, as you can see here, so you can have all of those amenities that will support the neighborhood and make it an active and lively place, as in New York City.
Right.
And you can generate some pretty compelling forms when you start to think about how we can combine the strengths and weaknesses of the type together, as you can see here with the Barbican in London. Here we're using towers, slabs, perimeter blocks, and row houses all together to mitigate the weaknesses of each type and really define that relationship between architecture, the scale of the architecture and the scale of the city. Because these are designed considering the mutual support of all of those types, what I've been arguing for. So then finally, come back to Dubai. We've got medium density, but we don't have that spatial definition.
That attitude should be activating the street, should be activating the green spaces between the buildings.
What's the relationship between how we look at those buildings and we look across the park? So it lacks coherence, everything feels the same. The streets aren't nice to walk around, the parks aren't nice to be in. There's limited ability to lock in more value than as commuter housing. So what I've been arguing for is we need to think more holistically about how we design our cities in the region. All right, we'll lighten it up a bit. Open space, the last bit. Am I doing on time? Yeah, okay. On open space. I'm a simple man. I believe the role of open space is the same as the role of the city, which is to bring people together. But more specifically, the role of open space is to create spaces where people feel welcome, challenged, comfortable and challenged to interact and gather, not just places that people go.
And I'm grateful, as I hope you all are, that we live in a city that has great vision and a lot of green ambition. We're looking to double our green space, per capita green space, by 2040 in Dubai. But I'm here to argue that we should be delivering for
Quality as much as quantity, right? It's really easy to deliver quantity of green space next to roads, and actually, exactly like this image, the quantity as opposed to the quality. So if we double our per capita green space, we're on par with what New York City is delivering. Really defined green spaces. They're all very strongly defined parks. So you get this experience of you walk from a city into a park, cross that threshold condition. It's quite a meaningful urban experience. Or in London, which has the park, and they're starting to build those typologies, the buildings at the edges of the park, to begin to form and frame those better. So, let's talk about how we can use parks to improve the spatial performance of the neighborhood and create beautiful urban morphologies, right? And I'll start with parks because usually that's the last part of the design process. Landscape architects here, unfortunately, are usually at the end and they've got to just design what's left. But we want to think more holistically about that. This park, one of the most beautiful parks you could ever imagine, was designed by that guy over there, the soon-to-be most famous landscape architect, Matt Stone. Take a bow. No, so pocket parks are super cool because you get to celebrate the hyper-local, right? Like really, you get to celebrate like who lives in that block, or what does that mean for the people who live immediately there? So they work best when they're a relief in the fabric, as you can see here. You can see these architectural typologies sort of create a space for that park, and the park manages that functional transition between the formal activities of the block and the informal activities along the beach there. You can even see how the future development will respond positively to this park. So it's best when it's connected to a street, it's best when it's oriented for people watching, and they contain threshold conditions. So again, it's really important how you cross into a park, even of that small scale. There's a really nice book if you're interested in these sort of things, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, how you can design for sociability. Let's see one that doesn't work so well. Here's in London. So green space, more is not more. Actually, I used to live right there. But there's loads of examples of this where parks are leftover green spaces, are uncharged, and it feels more like it's not contributing positively to the neighborhood other than a place where you can go and sit. I think we can do more than that, especially in urban areas. Let's go up a scale. It's my favorite neighborhood in Lima. It's incredible. Really, more can be even more by designing, again, the park and the building typology and the roads all together. So you get this incredible urban sequence where you can walk through the parks, across the streets, and each park is a little bit different, and you really get this incredible experience. The parks act as an extension of the neighborhood. In the day, they're open to everybody, but at night, they're gated for limited access. But you still have access if you live in one of these buildings around. And the buildings are quite beautiful in the sense of like they're dual aspect, which means you've got one unit on the front, on the street, usually studio or one bedroom, lesser socioeconomic cost, and like the very expensive ones are on the backside overlooking the park. What that means, you get social mix within your block, within your neighborhood. It's designed at the architectural typology. So the design for overlook, the parks are safe. Within the parks, you can have private spaces as well, so it gives a richness to the parks. Contain private areas, and they're well maintained. Or one of our projects, again, we're designing for urban livability here. This is in Medina. And, well, it still says Lima, but this is in Medina. And what we were doing, us and our landscape team, was how do we design for this quality of the open space for the park, and then design our block structures around that. So we were sure that we would be able to deliver quality for each of the people that live there. So you have parks of different sizes and scales, and they're all connected through an unbroken green network. Exactly what we're trying to avoid for neighborhood park. This is Ream Island, where a beautiful park design is ultimately limited in value because it's cut off from the buildings around it. Anybody who ever wants to go there is going to have to either drive there or cross an 8-lane road to get there. You know, what's that threshold condition like? I think we can do better than that. Another one of ours, I call this grain-based urbanism. So what we're doing is ideas in action. So we've got our linear park, which is organizing this new downtown. We've got perimeter residential courtyard blocks here. So we've got that collective space I was talking about earlier of the perimeter blocks, but then we open it up so to have visual permeability to the park, so you can see the linear park. Even if you're inside, you get a nice urban sequence, and you get a more urban area in the back over here. So it's really quite, we've got hierarchy, balance, differentiation of spaces, the things I've been talking about throughout this project, this talk. Best when linear parks are linear because you can connect neighborhoods together. You get maximum amount of people who can use that park. It's important to have sufficient density to activate these linear parks. It's very important. Porous boundary conditions, so you don't want just a linear park that has only walls around it because it's not as interesting. You want to have more engagement. You want to be able to design with overlook, that safety I'm talking about previously, and have civic elements as well. So when you have parks that have mosques or libraries or community centers, it gives a much better social vibe to a place than if it's just, think of La Mer, right? We call that cappuccino urbanism. It's a place where you have to go and buy something to enjoy it. It doesn't create a nice sort of civic environment we look for in a park. Conversely, where it's not working so well, again in Dubai, more can be too much. When you're spread too thin, you have insufficient densities, your boundary conditions are impermeable, you just got rear garden walls across all of the linear parks, more can be too much. All right, I'm wrapping it up. Singapore, as usual, leading by example. Macro, so city park, best when connected to a larger natural system, so it's next to the water here, so you really feel even stronger connection to the natural world when you're in this place. Accessible by many modes, contains areas of public, semi-public, and private space, variety of uses and activation, and when it's done very well, it can be representative of city identity, as it is in Singapore. Here, the park and the morphology and the building typology is starting to respond to that. You can see how Marina Bay Sands is taking up this bit. They're going to start building out here, and eventually we'll have that definition that we've been talking about for this project. And lastly, this city park, not a city park, the open space equivalent of a gated community. So it's designed for the morphology of the space, but it lacks that spatial ambition beyond the plot boundary. So I am an urbanist, and I put this in there for Gaurav, who's a golfer. I believe every urban golf course should be a public park. So what's next? We might ask ourselves, what is that beautiful house? Or we might ask ourselves, my God, what have I done? But it's important, if you're thinking big, to think typologically. Designers have to demonstrate they can deliver the qualities that we love about traditional cities. Hierarchy, balance, differentiation, all working together to provide beautiful cities and beautiful urban neighborhoods. So I hope I got you to think a little bit differently about how we think about cities and how we think about the growth of cities. And yeah, I'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah! Thank you, Shawn. Hey.
And I know I use a lot of words there that you might not understand. So if you want explanations, I can do that as well. The famous landscape architect in the back, you've got a question. Oh.
Yeah, great speech. Enjoyed it. It was a lovely presentation. I just wanted to ask, what do you think we address the cultural issue around, I think a lot of people come to Dubai because of what it offers, and unfortunately what it offers is the typological element. And so, how do you, for example, Mazda, which is one of the examples of a sustainable city that you show, that city is failing because it tried to change the typology of what the Middle East offers. So it removed cars from the inner city and then said you can come here and live sustainably, but then that clashed with what people are here for. So it didn't meld with the rest of the city. How do you think you change that culturally, holistically over the long term to develop something?
So thanks, good question. And thanks for coming. It's nice to see you. Yeah. Mazda failed for many reasons. It had giant ambitions and it delivered about half of them, which is still half more than expected as a real sustainable city. But the problem, as always, with designing cities is you have to consider more than just one element, like sustainability. If you're going to create a sustainable city, you've got to really think critically about the types of businesses that are going to be there, the type of jobs those will have, the type of workers that will work there, and the type of spaces that they want. So Masdar has limited employment opportunity, limited residential opportunity, a lot of sustainable opportunity, but you can understand how it's a little bit underwhelming. But again, it's a little bit unfair because cities take 15, 20 years. Mazar's getting close to there, and I don't see the sort of activation I would expect at this for the amount of investment that's gone into that at this point. So, and also like just let's keep it simple. Who wants to live in the desert if you don't have to? Like, you want to be sustainable? I'd rather
Invest something like that near the sea or have better connections to the sea.
have better public transport connections to the sea, etc. But if I had to be really critical, actually I have to. It's one of those things you can't use all of your words sometimes. But I think Abu Dhabi, this is no reflection on the leaders who are all amazing, I love them very much, has all of the vision, or sorry, has all of the money but none of the vision, in the sense of they're very interested in building beautiful islands for people to live, filling those with single family homes, not building public transport, so everything is segregated and it's just going to exacerbate the sort of issues that I've been talking about. If they were to invest in the downtown and the public transport systems, I think it could be, and those connect to your new islands, that would be super nice, but that's not what's happening at the moment. Okay, next question.
I have a question. Okay. Let me have that for a second. Right. So, do you think we can save the Middle East? Because we've done quite a lot wrong, and neighborhoods aren't really speaking to each other. So, can we rebuild, or do we have to start from scratch somewhere else?
I think I understand how you feel about the Middle East. Were you born here, perchance? So, the Middle East is amazing. The Middle East this is why I think Dubai is paradise. So, as an urban designer, I have seen thousands and thousands, hundreds and hundreds of plans and ambitions by community groups or governments or developers to build gleaming new metropolises that are going to attract global talent, that are going to then lead to the creation of high-paying jobs. And Dubai is the only place that's ever done it that I've seen. We're all exactly the reason for that. All of us could live and work anywhere in the world. We choose to be here. So that's amazing. In like 15 years, 20 years.
But yeah, they got some things wrong. They built it so fast. Connectivity, as you pointed out, is an issue. Pedestrian permeability is an issue. But this is what we're doing now. So we collectively, urban designers who are working in the region, are looking at how we can knit these things back together. The answer is never, even in Jakarta that is sinking, the answer is never to like start over new. People and governments do start over new because it's very complex and difficult and challenging and costly to redevelop urban areas because a lot of people who own things and different interests and stuff. So it's more tempting to just get cheap land somewhere and have massive investments in infrastructure and JV partnerships to build things. But you have to think about the communities, the people, their lives, the relationships that govern their lives. So we design for them.
One more question. So how does UAE change the narrative from novelty and will they, I'd say green spaces, for example, as a start, but will urban planners start talking to developers and how will that relationship unfold?
Oh, we do. I mean, everybody talks to developers. It's like a multifaceted issue. The Dubai 2040 urban plan is hopefully going to address much of this. We have things like affordable housing quantums you have to deliver. Every new metro station has to be designed for TOD, which is transit-oriented development, which means it's got to be dense, it's got to have housing adjacent to the metro stations. These are things which it goes without saying in Asia, where, I mean, there's more effective mechanisms, which is like in Japan, the government owns all the land around all the metro stations and they build hyper-dense, and they put schools and community centers and housing and businesses. So you can just live from metro station to metro station if you wanted to. It's how you can get the most value out of your infrastructure investment. So we're getting there. We're building, in the policy, you'll have to build denser around metro stations. You'll have to build affordable housing. So things are happening. The question is also with developers, like they're gonna build what's easiest for them a lot of the times. For example, like, nobody doesn't have blood on their hands, right? So for one developer alone, we're doing 9,000, 11,000, 13,000 single family homes. One developer, my studio alone. So it's just the nature of where we're at right now. But in the plan, the the hinterlands are reserved for single-family homes and stuff, and there's going to be 5 urban centers that you have to build denser, and so it takes time, but these things will be happening. But I wish the traffic was better. So yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the best thing out of your job? What is your most challenging day?
What was the best thing about my job and the most challenging thing? The best thing about my job is
At times it's super fun, right? Like some of the stuff that the team thinks up and designs, and when it gets built, and it's gonna be places that people like call home and raise families. Like, I got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. And when you really put in a lot of effort into really thinking through
making these incredibly high quality neighborhoods. Yeah, that's the best part. The most challenging would be, like, the day-to-day can be really challenging. What would the most challenging thing be? Timesheets or, something mundane like that. No, I mean, quite often developers have extremely aggressive timelines, and you have to deliver magic with limited resources and limited time. And that's when you finish and you step back and you're like, if I had another week, like, we could have really done something. And you try to think about how you can get that in later, but it doesn't always happen. So something like that. Yeah.
Dubai is very transitory. So people come and they go, and maybe because of that also as well is that the urban planning is like that. And also I was wondering, you're saying 2040 they're going to build more spaces, more gardens, but do you think that egalitarian spaces where all classes come to one in one place, is it possible for something like in Dubai?
2040, what was that?
Egalitarian, like classless spaces, where it doesn't matter where you're from or what your income is, you can come and meet over there.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know, like I see it's in Dubai, it's like very difficult.
Now because there's not a lot of it and there's not a lot of good quality green space in Dubai. But the government's taking it seriously. We have a proposal I was hoping actually my contact from DM would be here. We have a proposal into think and design the overall brand of Dubai in terms of public space, and then ensure that all future public space is designed in according with that plan. So on that point would be I'd open it to you guys. I'm gonna go one further, back to the bottom. What do you guys think if you could have the best absolute public space, best parks, what would that be? What would those components, right? More than recreation, more than green space, what do you think would give Dubai the best parks in the whole world? Paris has a brand. What would Dubai's parks and brand be?
Something that can be a joy also in summer.
Yeah?
Really.
Year round?
Yeah, always in summer, no summer. Yeah, over here, we don't in the back, just go over, there's no shade. So it has to go out.
Agree. So climate, some sort of,
Controlled.
not climate controlled, but more temperate and using microclimates to making sure we can have year-round access. The guy in the back, you had an opinion?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think we have a great example of public space, which is the beach.
Yeah.
I think Dubai is probably one of the most publicly accessible beaches that I can think of in most major cities. And I think that's about connectivity. It's about the fact that we have this cycle track that comes all the way through from the canal, and connections from south from the marina as well. And then it's literally across the entire extent of the city. So everyone can come directly from where they are. And I think that's sort of the main issue with Dubai's parks, is that they aren't connected. It's all disparate and different parts of the city. So I think it would have to be connectivity, right? That has to be the thing that drives people to public space.
I agree. Yeah. Connectivity, streets or parks on your doorstep. Anybody else? If you think about the best public space? Yeah.
You're in the Middle East and in UAE. How do you tackle the cultural challenges? Like the urban design that Dubai is built in is majorly based on the cultural concept, like based on the UAE locals' culture and the religious culture as well. So to change or to transform the urban living, like and come out from the villa compounds, how would you tackle such a challenge and like push the community into building something different?
Yeah, good question. So the question for those who couldn't hear was, how do we design for culture and try to change the embedded relationships of villa living within within Dubai? So I'm a white boy from Ohio. I'm not going to be the one who's going to be designing for culture, but what I do design for is like the spaces where the local population or the residents can appropriate and make their own, and that's how culture develops, right? And we've got an amazing city in terms of how they support culture already. It's incredible. So it's a question of like design better public spaces. One of my favorite quotes is from Jan Gale, and he says like, climates and cultures all over the world are different, but people are the same. If you give them a nice space, a good public space and a place to sit, they'll use it. And I agree with that. So just give better parks, better access to parks, better design that gets people mixing together. Yeah. If I had to answer this question, and what I think about it would be like, how do you get more opportunity? How are parks more than just recreation? Can you go there and you have, spaces where entrepreneurs can do their thing? Or can you, is there an economic and social function we could build into our parks without making it like a cafe or a lawn mayor or something like that? Something which is small scale, is the kind of ideas that I think about. Yes.
I like the idea of the park, similar to Hyde Park, maybe. I don't know. Maybe speaking of park, but it's a place where it's an escape. It's massive. It's an escape from the city, and you can do whatever you want in nature. Like that juxtaposition is between nature and urban living. But I want to ask a question, which goes back to what Gaurav mentioned about, say, the Middle East. It's that, Dubai is built, I feel like it's built wrong. There's too much space. You were talking about this. There's so much space building to building. It's kind of disorienting when you think all the buildings are close together, but there's like a kilometer between every building. So how can that be fixed? Like, is that kind of lost space? Can that be transformed somehow, or can things be built to make it a bit more walkable, or
Yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
So two things. She said she really likes Hyde Park. Who doesn't like Hyde Park? It's great. I lived in London for a long time. But you can't have that here because, I say that here because I think we're a little more responsible but we have a responsibility of designing landscapes in an arid region, in cities in an arid region. And even if you try to make it the most sustainable, the most water effective, with the most drought tolerant plants, the most local species, there's still it's still questionable about the value that would give at that scale. But don't get me wrong, in Riyadh they're trying to do it. They're building King Salman Park, which I think it's crazy big and very green. So it's a question of sustainability and political ambition and vision, I suppose. But the connectivity, that's what we all feel. Everything is really far apart. It's a nodal city as opposed to something which has one downtown. We have a marina, and we have downtown, and we have Dara at Old Town. And in the Dubai 2040 plan, we're gonna have the area by Expo, like Dubai South, and there's one more. So the strategy is how do we densify those and increase the connectivity between those, as opposed to sort of what it is now, which is more kind of spread. But also we're really young, 20 years, super young, so we got a ways to go. I have to go. Is there one more question? I have a really important EMAR presentation later that's hanging in the balance. So, cool. Nice. I hope I got you guys to think.
Thank you everyone for coming. I hope to see you next month and it's going to be really hard to top Shawn, but
That's fine.
let's see. Bye.